The whole world is talking about this game. I was completely unaware of what happened afterwards. I was actually much more interested in what was going on in the early middle game here, because Caruana played this really fascinating move H5 against Christopher Yoo.
This game is from the US Championships, which is going on currently in St. Louis, in America, and it's the fifth round. Christopher Yoo he's rated just under 2600. He would be one of the weakest players in the competition, and
Pretty strong all the same. Yeah.
pretty strong. Yeah, indeed. I'd be very pleased if I was as strong as he was, or as he is. And Fabiano Caruana is like world number 2 or world number 3. He's the strongest player in the event. Obviously wants to get a win in this game against one of the so-called weaker players, but it doesn't look good for Black. I like White's positions here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that H5 is a really interesting choice to make as Black here. Trying to put the White bishop under pressure. And Christopher's response here, bishop H4, attacking the rook on D8, is also kind of a very natural move here, because I presume he expected Caruana to play rook E8 here, which means the rook is no longer on the open file, and then he can probably follow up with pawn from F2 to F4. And Christopher could say, well, I have a little bit of a gain here, because now I've got like the strengthened pawn center. My bishop on G3 is now in a more active square. But this didn't happen at all, because Caruana played an extraordinary move after H5. Bishop H4. He actually just sacrificed the rook.
Yeah, he took the pawn with his knight.
And I'm pretty sure that the commentators who are watching this live, and certainly Christopher never saw this one coming. It's a very interesting sacrifice, and really shows like a really deep understanding of the position here. So what happened, Jonathan?
I think at this stage Christopher took the rook and said thanks very much, and then Fabiano took the bishop, and so Fabiano's compensation, I guess, is that he has 2 bishops against a knight and a rook. But it's interesting compensation, because the 2 bishops can often compensate if for being down an exchange, having that advantage.
You look at the position here. It strikes me that the position looks very closed still, but in reality, as soon as that c6 pawn goes to c5, that bishop on b7 will be, on the big diagonal from a8 to h1, and also the other black bishop, on f8 can wheel its way around to maybe f6 or to g7 after the g pawn is pushed, and so for white it's more of a closed position. But for black, it could quite quickly become an open position. And of course, in open positions, bishops tend to reign supreme. So he's got some decent compensation here. And it's very hard to see how white's going to make progress. But let's see how the game plays out anyway. Who could have expected, the result on the board, let alone what happened afterwards?
I think Christopher was probably very pleased here. He's up in exchange, admittedly for a pawn, against like one of the best players in the world. So he's thinking, I have a chance today. He's thinking, I have a chance of beating one of the best players in the world, which would be a fantastic result. But Mark, I think this position is very deceptive, and it's the kind of position where you play a few moves like just developing, castling, putting the king into safety here on b1, bringing the other rook over to the open e file. And it looks as everything's going great for white, but black isn't under any threats. And again, black saying, yeah, do what you can, but nothing's happening.
It's a very calm performance by Fabiano Caruana here. I mean, he's not trying to force the issue at all. He's just simply making little moves that improve his position incrementally. And whereas white still has to come up with some big plan in order to radically change the nature of the position.
I just wondered here if the queen went up there trying to get the rook on the 7th. But again, I think black will just kick the queen out and say, yeah, if you want to exchange queens, go for it. I'm quite happy here. I've got my two bishops. The two bishops here are going to stop your rook coming in on the d file, and in the meantime I will just, like, something like this might happen, and the rooks aren't doing anything, whereas the bishop on e7 will go, as you said, will go off to, it'll move to f6. It's just a nice position here for,
and sometimes really strong players, I often talk to my students about this, that they don't see that deep in terms of actual calculation. Like really strong grandmasters don't necessarily see 10 or 20 moves deep, especially in like late opening or middle games. But what they're really good at doing is asking the right questions of a position, or which enable them to assess the long-term prospects of the position. And a simple truth about this position is that those two rooks, while they're on a open file, the d1 rook's on the open file all the way to d8, and the other rook's on a semi-open file. Rooks are most powerful on open files or behind pawns going forward. But the interesting thing is there is no pawn that a white rook can get behind to go forward that's going to cause problems for the black position. And the fact that the white rook is on d1 doesn't really do anything for Christopher's prospects, because the two bishops basically have all of those squares covered, and as a result he doesn't have any clear idea, or it isn't easy for me to see where the knight should go to be placed in order to try to cause problems. And so I mean, actually, it's much easier to play for black, even if white is nominally better according to the engine, or just because of the material advantage.
Yeah, I suspect Christopher is starting to. Maybe he realized it. He probably realized it earlier than either of us. He's a much stronger player than either of us. But I think his mood will be going down around here. From the high of thinking I've got a great position to realizing actually my position isn't any better. And if curiously enough, I guess here white might want to play h3 and g4, but actually black decides to open the h file.
Yeah, so John, okay. this position, breaking on the h file, h5 to h4, reminds me a little bit of the Berlin defense that was played by Tarish in the 19th century, that Kramnik famously used to defeat Kasparov in their world title match.
You're talking about a position like this, Mark, I guess.
Yeah, this sort of position.
Berlin.
Yeah, and if white maybe goes h3, like for example this position, obviously this isn't exactly what would have happened, but if black just goes bishop e7, for example, and white at some point plays g4, that would lead to the exchange of the pawns and the opening up of the h file. And obviously this is a very different position, but it's very difficult for white in this particular type of position to make a breakthrough against a very, very solid position, ostensibly where the two black bishops are controlling all these key points of entry. So if we go back to the actual game, obviously the difference here is that there's it's an exchange for a bishop and a pawn, but you can see some similarities that his setup, his defensive setup, is very much like a hedgehog. It's very prickly. It's very hard to get through on any squares. And now the h file is now going to open, and that's going to lead to problems for white long term.
So here, white decided to try and exchange queens or force a weakness, and curiously, black said no problem, and just kicked the queen.
What a big surprise here. He's happy to go into an ending and exchange down. And it's such a surprise to face a move like that when you consider that by moving f7 to f6, you've just weakened the e6 pawn. It makes it look like the bishop on c8 is going to be stuck there, saddled with the defense of a weak backward pawn, which is being attacked by a rook on e1. But as it happens, if he takes on c7, all it's doing is just improving the the black position a little bit, and there is no way through. It's interesting. The queens don't actually come off. Maybe this was his best chance, was actually to take off the queens, because we'll see what happens in the game. But it turns out that
Queen went back, and then so now the h file is open for this rook, and maybe it'll come down to nice juicy square would be a h2, trying to come over queen side somewhere. And here I liked the next move, black's next move. I thought was very interesting.
This is a fantastic move, because what he's doing here is that he's understanding that black's prospects are limited for as long as the position remains closed. But following the general maxim that bishops are better in open positions, he just basically blasts open the center here.
But of course, rooks are also better in open positions, aren't they, Mark? Is that not like isn't that why this move is difficult for mere mortals like ourselves to make, this e5 move? Because we're thinking rooks want open files, and bishops want open lines. So how do you decide that the bishop's lines are better than the rook's lines?
It's simply because there's one particular move that's been played by white that changes the whole evaluation of the position, and that was when white earlier played b2 to b3, which means that the white king actually is very exposed to attack, like a bishop f5 check. And if there's a big series of exchanges in e5, then not only does the bishop come to f5 and start attacking the white king, but the black bishop on e7 is going to be able to go to f6 and exert all sorts of nasty pressure all the way along, the long diagonal there.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on and just see what happened here. Curiously enough, white now played rook h1, but I was wondering what might have happened if he'd taken the pawn that seems to be there for free. What would you do here, Mark?
Well, if I was playing black, I'd be looking at lots of different possibilities. Well, the first thing is that I'd throw in a check for good measure, because not on the basis that play a check it might be mate, but put a check in there and then ask the question, where's the king going? Because if the king goes to b2, you immediately can play rook h2 check. Have a look at this. There's a nice tactical sequence, because you can't block with the rook because of the really nice little tactic.
This rook is now pinned to the king, and therefore that allows queen takes queen, and the rook can't take back because of this pin. And that would be game over for white. And if the king goes after the check, the king can go back to h1.
A1,
A1, and
now
you take and you play bishop here, and now we've got our bishops all the way down here, and those bishops are very dangerous. The only
They're
move
really strong.
The only move to keep in the game is rook here, defending the knight on c3. But I guess rook c2, adding another attack to this knight, and it's going to be
it's curtains.
Black is winning that knight, and therefore it'll be two bishops against a rook, and that'll be a big advantage for black.
And there's another nice thing going back there, and just noticing that if he hadn't gone where the king is in check on b1, if the king can't go to b2 or shouldn't really go to a1, the other alternative is king to c1. But as it turns out, that just gives black a whole range of attacking possibilities. At the very first, he can just play bishop g5 check anyway. Then after king b2, rook h2 check will probably transpose again. So really you can see the power of the bishops again. There's no way out. One thing that Caruana is doing quite well in this game, I think, and that maybe his opponent missed, was the idea of playing on general principles again. He didn't take an e5, but he actually played rook to h1. But there was a better move there that I think he should really have considered there.
Instead of rook h1 and instead of queen takes pawn, what should he have considered?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of a well-known fact that if you can blockade an isolated pawn with a knight by like knight e4 here, it happens in Dutch defenses and in King's Indian. If you can drop a knight into a good central square like that, it does reduce the attacking options for black. So it provides cover for the king in b1, and it also stops the bishop in e7 from getting into the game. And there's time to play rook h1 afterwards. I think this would have been the smart way to defend, and somehow maybe get g4 in, possibly even g5 at some point. But if he can exchange off a pair of rooks here, as in black's rook, then he's got a very good chance of holding this. I can't really see how he loses this if he just drops the knight in an e4 and forgets about trying to win the e pawn. because what happened in the game really showed that once that bishop becomes active and makes its way around to d4, then he's in a whole world of trouble, and it quickly turns in black's favor.
Anyway, he played this, and the bishop
c5.
Queen. And queen went up here, and now the rooks came off. So white, it seems to be getting what he wants to do, which is to swap off a pair of rooks. But the queen went to here, and there's all sorts of threats of this queen coming here. The queen also is defending the g6 pawn. It's also defending the e5 pawn. And
I hate to say it, but he wouldn't have had any possibility of doing all this, Caruana, if the white knight was sitting on e4. It would have stopped bishop c5, would have stopped queen d6.
Absolutely.
And because the black queen would have been stuck defending the e5 pawn, you know. But
and now here, this is white has to defend this pinned knight here. It's pinned with the bishop against the king, and so white's pieces are very passive. And I liked the way Caruana he slowly improved. He's taking advantage of the knight and the rook here that are doing almost nothing for white, and he just starts trying to take squares away on the queen side, maybe open up, and white got worried about that pawn moving further forward and so blocked it, but that just makes other weaknesses.
Queen e4 is kind of adding insult to injury. He can even move his queen to a square where in theory it could be taken, were it not for the wonderful bishop on d4.
Exactly. The knight isn't really attacking that at all. So
whereas it's actually the white pawn in g4 is under attack now, so it's trying to take that.
Whoops. Okay, so we had he played queen here. White is trying to get some checks against the king. Also, he doesn't want to give up the c6 pawn because that's protecting everything. So that's why he doesn't go for taking the pawn in g4 just yet. So pawn went here, and now there's a bit of a dance between the king and the queen.
It's a merry dance, isn't there, going back and forth? And at some point, white just decided that you had to do something as opposed to waiting for the inevitable breakthrough, and played b4. But this probably, hastens defeat in reality.
Mark, would this be a gavotte?
A gavotte.
A gavotte. Yes.
Yeah. Well, almost as checkmate. It's almost checkmate.
Actually, what I liked. Look at it. We've got this. Okay, so I don't know why did white now play b4? That seems like
I think it's
crazy.
An act of desperation. I think because he obviously seen a winning plan for black. If you go back there for a second, so like what's an obvious long-term plan? Probably just to activate the rook. Like he's got these ideas to go, for example, bishop f5 here.
Yes.
Let's just imagine he goes bishop f5, and what he's threatening there. So if you just make a move or two.
Okay, so I'll make this move here.
Yeah, and now go bishop f5, queen f6, for example, attacking the c pawn. Now bishop takes c3 check. Rook takes here. Queen b1 check, king a1, and queen a1 mate. I'm not sure if you don't have an extra square for the king. This is basically a winning plan for black, and there's no defense. True.
So that's why he had to play b. That's why he played b4 anyway, to give himself a luft for his king.
But it's quite nice here if queen takes c4 anyway, which he could have done after b5
that's what he did.
check.
That's what he did play.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah. After a b5 check, you're saying
it looks like you're mating black, but this is it's kind of nice the way he gets out of the mate. He just takes.
And I guess he takes here check.
And once again, because the bishop on d4, it's impossible to take the queen, and mate will quickly follow for black now.
So instead, he again the queen and kings danced around. We had a check first, and then I guess if the bishop takes the knight here, we're going to take here, and there'll be at least a draw for
perpetual check.
Perpetual,
it was a good effort, a good defensive idea. And there's another idea there. If the bishop, instead of taking the knight, and actually here, Jonathan, it's kind of funny because if you play bishop f5 here, avoiding the perpetual, you got queen a8 checkmate. So it's
That would
You know,
be an unfortunate loss.
that would have been very
Caruana.
unfortunate. And then I think it would have been Fabiano who was feeling out of sorts after the game in terms of.
I suspect you could be right
feeling
there.
hard done by.
Yeah.
But Queen check. John, what did he do? He just took the pawn, did he?
He just took the pawn. Exactly, Mark. And it's check, and so White put his king there, offering the knight on c3. But of course, if
we know that's a perpetual.
Yeah. So instead, what he played check again, just to bring just to protect the c pawn here from the queen, and the king went back, and now we have this little king and queen, this gavotte once again.
Now explain to people what you mean by gavotte. Because
I don't really know about that, because I do know a gavotte is some kind of like 17th century, 18th century dance that they used to do. But I if you did a gavotte now for our viewers, I would not know that it was a gavotte rather than a Charleston. Well, I do know the Charleston, Mark, because my grandmother taught me the Charleston many years ago, and she learnt it in 1924 and danced and did it on the Abbey stage in the mid 1920s. Yes,
That's
she
pretty
came
cool.
over from England. Yes, and Charleston was originally danced in 1923.
That's interesting. For people who aren't in Ireland, the Abbey Theatre is the National Theatre just off O'Connell Street in Dublin, and it was founded in 1904 by W.B. Yeats, Lady Gregory, and Singh as well. Three really important, playwrights. Yeats is also a poet. So, but that's interesting about Charleston. But I'll tell you one thing: I do know the gavottes from when I was a kid playing the piano. I think gavottes are also certain types of pieces that we would have played when we were, learning piano and going up through the grades.
Sure. Anyway, we had more of this little dance of the king and queen, and eventually White took this pawn, but that allows the bishop finally to come out. That's blocking things here.
Threatening mate.
Threatening to play. Yes, indeed, threatening to play checkmate on a2, the magic square. So White played rook c2, and the queen went in anyway.
Once again, he can't take
all of
White's problems.
Can't take with this knight. Yeah, the knight is pinned.
All these problems that White had are just because he didn't block on e4 with the knight.
And now the bishop went here. Check. King had to go here. Another bishop comes here. I guess if I'm just looking to see what else. No, there's nothing else. If the knight at this stage, White resigned. If the knight goes here, you play queen check. Only move to stop that is to play here, and then that would just lose.
Well, it's just mate again.
I don't even bother taking the queen. I don't take the queen. I checkmate. So that was how the game ended. But it didn't stop there, because they shook hands at this point, and then Christopher was so disgusted with his play that he kind of scrunched up his score sheet, stormed out, and on the way out he bumped into a videographer and pushing her over, I think, and
by accident, presumably. Like it was just I don't know the situation.
He was obviously very upset, and because of that frustration of having got a good position against a very strong player, he took his anger out on people he shouldn't have taken his anger out on, and the tournament organisers have expelled him from the tournament, and he has been banned from the St. Louis Chess Club. I presume we'll hear more of that in the next few days, but St. Louis seem to have problems with their players. They often, like
the events.
A few years ago they had Hans Niemann, who's very famous in the chess world, who trashed one of his rooms. At least he waited until he got back to his hotel room before venting his anger physically. Anyway, that's a pity, because it ruins the tournaments somewhat.
Well, chess is a very hard game, and this was a really tough game to lose, especially against the American number one. And if you ever have aspirations to getting on to, the American Olympic team, which it would be a huge achievement, especially with a country the size of America. A strong performance in the national championships. I know it's all done by rating. Would give you the confidence maybe to fulfill all those requirements and also make you a contender. And I don't know. He's a young fella who might be at the point as well of thinking about taking a year or two out before going to university to play chess. So
Maybe.
beating Caruana in this game would maybe have helped with sponsorship and that kind of thing. So it's sad to see a young player to get so exasperated and frustrated to lose control like that. So hopefully, it'll all end well, and apologies will be made, and fences will be mended, and he'll get back to doing what he does best, which is causing problems for the world's top players.
Okay, thanks, Mark.